So this is my Penfierce 8000. This is my edibles, heavy edibles rod, 14 foot. First step, what we're going to do is we're going to loosen up this, what we call a drag nut, until it's all the way loose. Pop it off. Then we're going to pop our spool off. Careful so you don't get any washers, those drag washers at the bottom here sticking on the inside of the spool. That's off. Okay, step number one for the servicing of the reels, pretty important, is on the inside there you'll see a little wire circlip, and that's where your drag washers sit. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a really small screwdriver. It just pops out. Just be careful, it does like to bounce around the room. Basically, some of them are round, some of them are triangular, but that's basically what it looks like. Then you've got all your drag washers. You need to be quite gentle and quite careful here. Don't be too rough. But there you see, there are all the drag washers. There's a stainless steel washer. In between each stainless steel washer is either a carbon tex washer or it's a grease impregnated felt washer. So what we're going to do is we are going to keep it in that order. You don't want to confuse them. And we're going to polish it off with a rag, get all the grease off, and then we are going to re-grease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to polish them all, and then I'll get to the re-grease and I'll film the re-greasing part of it. Okay fellas, as you see, here are all my drag washers separated, the felt, stainless, felt stainless, etc. Keep them in the same order that they came out of the reel so they can go back in the same order. So what you would want to do now is start with a felt washer. You don't grease those stainless steel washers at all. So I know it's going to be very difficult to see. But when you, okay, I'm going to, hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing. I've got a earbud with marine grease on it. And I'm putting a really thin layer of this marine grease. I just stuck it in a little lid, but you really don't want a lot, so it must be a really tiny amount. So when I hold it up to the camera, you can't even see the grease on it. It's a really thin layer. And then you place that in the reel, push it down flat. You take one of these stainless washers that I have not greased and you put it on top of that washer. If you grease the stainless steel washers as well as the fiber washers, you get a buildup of grease. You get one of those slippy drags where you loosen the drag knob 10 times and then it takes a while for the reel to loosen up on the drag. You don't want that. You want instant control when a fish is on, and yeah, when you're fighting a fish. I'm going to go ahead and do all of those, and then I'm going to show you how I service the drag nut or drag knob. Okay, so I've greased up all those washers, just the fiber ones, not the stainless ones. I'm going to repeat that, very important. Pop them back in. I've replaced that little stainless steel circlip. Now we get to this part here, also pretty important. This is the drag nut. You will see that there's on a lot of the reels, not all of them, but a lot of your high-end reels have got a seal that goes around, and what that seal does, it seals so that you don't get any sand and water entering the reel. As soon as you get sand or water entering your drag on a reel, you end up with just a mess of sandy, sticky, gross, sticky drag. It's terrible. So all I do is I give that rubber a bit of a cleanup. I give this whole thing a good wipe down, get rid of all that residual grease and all the fishing rashes that are on it. Then you'll take your fishing oil, fishing lube, and on the inside there I'll put 3 or 4 drops. There's a spring inside there with a little dog spring that makes that click 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 noise. When you tighten up, you just want to keep that lubed. Simple as that. Then I'll replace this drag washer seal back on, and then once again very little bit of grease, just so that it slips around the top of that reel smoothly. If you put too much grease, it ends up becoming a sand trap. and you end up with a whole lot of sand. Okay, so that goes in the top of the spool. Boom, boom. That is basically your spool serviced. You can, if you want to, underneath your spool, I'll just get rid of the bits of sand and fishing crap that's in there. On the inside of the spool, you'll see that little mechanism. That is the ratchet mechanism when the spool spins, the fixed spool spins and click, click, clicks. You know what, if you want to put a drop of oil, a little bit of grease on that spring and the base where the pin goes into the aluminium so that it eliminates any corrosion. That's the spool done. Your spool is perfect, 100%. It's ready to go. It's ready to fish. Now we get to the big bad nasty. Alright, so step number 1, your high end reels turn backwards and your handle will pop out. To service this handle, you want to put a drop of oil in that knuckle joint, a drop of oil on the thread. Okay, I've loosened up all the screws on the fender side, popped it off. This is what the inside of your coffee grinder looks like when that's off. At the bottom here, you'll see a little screw, pretty hidden in grease, which is always a good thing. You're going to loosen that screw, and what that screw does is it holds this main shaft in to the riser, which controls the line oscillation. So I'll pop that loose quickly. Oh my god, same problem as last night. It's a tiny little screw, and now if you have a look here, once that screw's out, oh goodness, is there a secondary screw? Anyway, the main shaft should just pop out, so I'm going to give it a, oh hang on, sorry, there's a second screw, my bad, all that grease. The reel I serviced last night, which was a Finno Biscayne Offshore 70, only had one, so my bad. The theory is all the same. So now that shaft should just slide out. It's also going to get a good polish and a clean before we put back together. Now that that shaft's out of the way, your entire main gear should quite easily pop out of the reel. You've got a bearing on the side, which is the fender side of the reel, and if you look on the inside, right at the back, where the other side of that main gear goes, there's a second bearing which we're going to be taking out, polishing up and oiling up. So all I'm going to do is give this a good clean now, give all those parts a good clean, put a drop of oil on my bearing, pop it all back in, and I'll be back when we're done with that. Okay, while I'm polishing up and cleaning up this main gear, this is the big balls of the reel, I'm going to give a little tip, something that I do. Don't throw your old toothbrushes away. So the teeth of those gears, it's quite hard to get that grease out. So I literally get it out with the toothbrush so that if there's a grain of sand that might in the future become part of a rubbing compound to damage my main gears, I can make sure it's not in there anymore. And then this little gear which controls your rising and falling of the spool of the reel, which I said earlier is for line oscillation. That's it, nice and clean with a toothbrush. I'm going to grease it up, pop the bearing back on, and boom. Okay guys, so you'll see inside of my reel is empty. Everything's out, everything's been polished. All I've done is oil the bearings. I haven't applied any grease to those fittings. I do that one by one as I replace them. Next step, if you look on the inside there, you'll see a tiny little screw. All that screw does is hold this retention ring that keeps the nut from turning loose on its own, and then you're going to loosen that big nut, and then the whole top end of the reel is going to pop off. I'm going to do that and I'll get back to you when it's off. Okay, so I've taken the little screw out, I've taken the nut off, and oops, there we go. It is off. Pretty simple. Always full of sand and dirty from fishing. This is where the stuff gets really technical. This is where it's incredibly difficult. So I'm going to clean up those few items and then I'm going to get to this. In most cases, I would recommend that you guys don't even open this up unless you have a serious issue. It is all waterproofed and sealed. I do that every 5th service. I'll open up and service my non-return bearing, my dog spring. Otherwise, I don't stuff around here too much. Okay, guess what, guys? Okay, so I did climb into the business end of this. I've just basically opened it up, polished it up, re-greased, oiled, put back together. As Murphy has it, load shedding, the light is starting to get shitty. You guys can't really see the parts, individual parts. But the basics are the basics are the basics. Give it a go, and if you do get stuck on any reel, I've probably got the manual for it, and I can give you a hand. If I do find other very technical little things now with the reassembly, I will try and film it under light, headlamp or something. But if not, you guys will see the reel when it's clean and finished. Over and out. Okay guys, I don't know why I didn't film it, because it is ridiculously important. So this mechanism inside here, which is made up of 4 or 5 parts, is what we call the bail arm wheel. A lot of reels will, underneath this silver wheel you see here, there'll be a bearing. I'm not a big fan of those, so often I'll get an engineer to make me a backlight wheel that fits underneath there, the same size as what the bearing is, because your line's coming down from the ocean when you're reeling up and there's salt water going in there, so it's continuously corroding and becoming a problem. But anyway, so if you loosen this screw at the back here, the bail arm will pop off. You'll have a bunch of different parts. Keep them in order, polish them up, scrub off a bit of corrosion with your kitchen sponge. Don't use sandpaper, don't use anything corrosive or anything abrasive. Oil it all very well and put it all back together. Pop the screw back in, put a drop of oil in the screw hole before you tighten that screw. And it'll keep this bail arm turning. It is ridiculously important. If this thing stops turning while you're fishing, your braid starts cutting a line into this stainless steel wheel, or in most reels it's brass, and it'll ruin your braid, it'll ruin your line. So when you finally get that big bite, that big fish, and this wheel stops turning, there's a good chance you lose that big fish, and you're damaging 1,000 rands worth of braid. JDB DNA 40 pound, which I've got on this reel here, is about 950 rand for 300 meters. So you want to look after your braid like your newborn child. So this little thing here, I don't know why I didn't film it. Next service on the next reel, which is the Big Boss 6000, I will film the servicing of this part of the reel. It is ridiculously important. Every fishing trip, every single fishing trip, after rinsing and it's dried, you need to put a drop of oil on either side where the black meets the silver, and a drop of oil on the screw, as well as a drop of oil where this bail arm comes into this black section here, because it'll corrode there. So as the line slides along the bail arm and it's supposed to slide into the wheel, it'll get hooked on the corrosion in this corner here, and it'll damage your braid, and you're going to lose those big fish. So we all spend stupid amount of money for that big fish. Okay, closing video on servicing a reel. So now I'm done. I've serviced every last little piece of this reel. Give it a turn. A coffee grinder is never going to be like a Grandway 40 or an SL30 SH or whatever, where it spins and spins. It's not made like that. You want it to feel like there's grease moving around inside there. It's smooth. It's almost silent. If you're hearing a crunching or a grinding sound, etc., you haven't cleaned all the sand out. And then most importantly, like I said to Debbie, so Debbie services all her own reels as well. I've taught her in the last 3 years. So every part of the reel that you take off when you service and you put it back, you need to sit and look at that part of the reel and understand what it does. So if you get confused with the parts or where it goes or whatever, it's easy because you understand what that part does when you putting it back into the reel. So once you understand what every little part of the reel does, when you're servicing, you put it back, then it's easy to reassemble. And it's also when you're fishing and you hear a sound or you don't hear a sound, because this little thing that we spoke about in the last video will always make a little sound. So when that sound stops, you know that thing stopped turning. And you know how to diagnose, you know how to fix that problem. A little trick I have is I grab line off my reel while it's on my rod and my other line, and I run it back and forth over that wheel, get it turning again, and then I carry on fishing. Because if that thing doesn't turn, serious problems. But you know, turn it super smooth, crank your drag up a bit. It's not sticky, it's super smooth. Service your reels, guys. These things aren't freaking cheap. Look after them. And I mean, there's a reason why they say that's a once in a lifetime fish, because often they are, and you don't want to lose that fish because you didn't look after your equipment. Let me know if there's any other little technical things you want to know about a reel. I love this shit.